Hey, my name is Simon Hale. I'm 32, and I live in Denver, Colorado, where I work nights as an ER nurse at Ridgeline Medical Center. I just spent 4 days at a trauma conference in Cleveland, and all I wanted that morning was a window seat and 8 hours of sleep before my next shift. Standing at gate C14, I had no idea a stranger was about to grab my hand and rearrange the rest of my year. The gate area was maybe half full, that flat fluorescent hum every airport has before 7 in the morning, and I was scrolling through nothing on my phone when I heard footsteps coming too fast across the tile. I looked up, and a woman I had never seen before in my life closed the distance in about 4 steps, took my hand like she already owned it, and said, low and urgent, "Kiss me like you mean it, please, right now." I want to tell you I hesitated. I didn't. Years of pulling gurneys through double doors had trained something out of me, some ordinary instinct to ask questions first, and my body moved before my brain caught up to what was happening. I leaned in. She met me halfway, our noses bumping once before we found each other, clumsy in a way that somehow made it feel more real, not less. She smelled like airport coffee and rain that hadn't happened yet, and I felt her go still against me, holding her breath, waiting to find out if the world was still going to fall on her. Over her shoulder, I watched a man in a gray suit walk the length of the terminal with the kind of scan you only see from security or from somebody who does this for a living. His eyes cut fast over every woman traveling alone and never slowed down long enough to really look at 2 people wrapped up in each other by gate C14. He passed 6 feet from us. He didn't stop. She pulled back first. Her hand was still locked around mine, and it was shaking, actually shaking, hard enough that I felt it in my own fingers. Dark hair had come loose from whatever knot she'd tied it in that morning, and there was an exhaustion behind her eyes that didn't match the rest of her, like she'd been awake and afraid for longer than one bad morning could explain. "I am so sorry," she said, already stepping back, already checking the terminal for an exit that wasn't really an exit, just another gate, another crowd to disappear into. "I shouldn't have. I don't even know you. I just needed. Is he gone?" I asked, since that seemed like the more useful question. She glanced over her shoulder, like looking twice might undo it. "For now, who was that?" "Nobody," she said, so obviously a lie that I almost laughed, except she didn't look like a woman telling a fun lie. She looked like someone standing very still in the middle of a flood, trying to work out which direction still had dry ground. The gate agent's voice cut through the terminal, calling final boarding for Denver. And the woman, I didn't know her name yet, wouldn't for another 10 minutes, flinched at the sound like it had teeth. Her eyes cut to the little monitor listing the flight number, and something in her face changed fast, a decision landing before she'd finished making it. "That's your flight? Denver?" Yeah, she was already digging through her bag, and what she came up with wasn't cash or a fresh reservation. It was a boarding pass for a different city entirely, bought at a kiosk less than an hour earlier for no better reason than it was the first flight leaving, and it got her through security. "I have a ticket to Chicago I don't want anymore," she said, already moving toward the counter. "Please tell me you can just move me onto this one instead," I heard her ask the agent, quiet and fast. If there was any way to switch, any seat at all, she didn't care where on the plane. I heard the keys under the agent's fingers. I heard her say thank you in a voice that cracked straight down the middle. We didn't say much walking down the jet bridge. I kept glancing at her like she might disappear if I looked away too long. And she kept her eyes fixed on the door behind us, like the man in the gray suit was still following even though I hadn't seen him again since the gate. It wasn't until we were wedged into a row near the back of the plane, her in the middle seat by pure luck or bad luck, that either of us managed a full sentence. "I'm Simon," I said, since it felt strange to have kissed a woman before I knew her name. "Naomi." She said it fast, like she was testing whether it was safe to give me even that much. Then, quieter. "Thank you, for back there, you didn't have to. You didn't really give me a choice." That earned the smallest crack of a smile, gone almost as fast as it came. "No, I guess I didn't. I should tell you something about myself, because it matters for everything that happened after. I don't hesitate. Not because I'm brave. I used to think that's what it was, and I was wrong. But because 3 years ago I learned exactly what a few seconds of hesitating costs, and I promised myself I'd never find out again. So when a stranger grabs my hand in an airport and asks me to kiss her like I mean it, some part of me underneath the thinking part just says yes before I can talk myself out of it. I didn't know that yet, sitting next to her on that plane. I only knew I wasn't sorry. She didn't offer anything else for a while, and I didn't push. You learn, in waiting rooms, that people tell you things when they're ready, and not 1 second before. So I looked out the window and let her have the silence. And somewhere over Iowa, she spoke again, quiet enough that I had to lean in to hear her over the engine noise. "I was supposed to get married in 8 days, she said, looking straight ahead, not at me. "I found out something last night that I can't unfind. This morning I got in my car and drove to the airport, and I didn't have a plan past not being there when everyone else woke up. I didn't ask who he was. I didn't ask what she'd found out. I just said, 'That's a pretty big morning.' She let out something that wasn't quite a laugh. 'You have no idea.' Her phone buzzed twice in her lap, sharp against the quiet, and I watched her go rigid, watched her turn it face down without looking at the screen at all, like whatever was on it might reach through the glass. She kept her hand flat on top of it for the rest of the flight. I noticed. You learn to notice things in my line of work. You also learn when asking helps and when it just makes people hold on tighter. Somewhere over Nebraska, exhaustion caught up with her all at once, the way it does with people running on adrenaline since before sunrise, and her head tipped sideways until it landed, unplanned, against my shoulder. I sat very still for the rest of the flight, so I wouldn't wake her, watching the wing catch the light, thinking I had no idea what I'd just agreed to be part of, and that some reckless piece of me didn't especially want to find out how to get out of it. Denver was gray and cold when we landed, ordinary for early spring, and Naomi stood at baggage claim holding a single carry-on like it was the only thing she owned in the world, which, it turned out, was close to true. She'd left with a phone, a wallet, and the clothes she'd been wearing when she found out whatever she'd found out. No toothbrush, no plan, and no idea yet where she was sleeping that night. "I have a cousin in Boulder," she said, not sounding convinced by her own sentence. "I think I have a cousin in Boulder." "You think? We're not close." I could have let that be her problem. It wasn't mine. I'd known this woman for 3 hours, and most of what I knew about her fit on an index card, a name, a wedding that wasn't happening, a man in a gray suit, a phone she was afraid of. But that rule I told you about, the one about not hesitating, made the decision before I'd finished thinking it through. "I've got a couch," I said. "It's not much, but it's warm, and nobody's coming looking for you there tonight." She looked at me a long moment, like she was checking for the catch. "Why would you do that?" "Because you looked like you needed one good decision made for you today, and I had one lying around." Her eyes went bright, too bright, the kind that comes right before someone loses the fight to stay composed in public. She didn't cry. She just nodded once and said, so quiet I almost missed it, "Okay, just for tonight." It wasn't just for tonight. Neither of us knew that yet. I gave her the bed that first night and took the couch myself, because it seemed like the kind of thing you did. And around midnight I heard her moving in the kitchen and found her sitting at my counter in the dark, staring at a glass of water like it owed her an explanation. "Can't sleep?" I asked. "I keep waiting to feel like I made a mistake," she said. "I keep waiting and it isn't coming." I sat down across from her, and in the dark, with 3 time zones and one very strange day between her and everything she'd left behind. She told me the shape of it, if not yet the details. Her family ran a manufacturing company in Cleveland, going back 3 generations. Her grandfather's name still stamped into the concrete over the loading dock. The company was in real trouble, the kind that closes plants and costs people their jobs, and her father had spent a year negotiating a deal with another family's company that could save it. Part of that deal was a wedding, her wedding, to a man named Julian Voss, whose father held the money that would keep 400 people employed. It wasn't even really a secret, she said. Everyone in Cleveland business circles knew what the marriage was for. I knew what it was for. I told myself I could live with that it was practical, that plenty of people build a life on less than love and end up fine. She turned the glass slowly on the counter. Then last night I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear, and I understood it wasn't going to be a practical marriage. It was going to be a robbery, and I was the thing being used to open the door. She didn't tell me what she'd heard. Not yet. I didn't ask twice. I just refilled her water and said, "You don't have to figure out the rest of it tonight." And she looked at me like that was the first kind thing anyone had said to her in longer than made sense. By the 3rd day, she'd stopped mentioning the cousin in Boulder, and I'd stopped bringing it up. She fell into small, useful rhythms without seeming to notice she was doing it, reorganizing my kitchen cabinets by a logic that actually made sense, catching a scheduling conflict in some clinic paperwork I'd been putting off for a week. I found her one afternoon at my kitchen table with a legal pad and my stack of unopened bills, the ones I always meant to deal with on a day off that never came, sorting them into 3 neat piles. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I know. I wanted something to do with my hands that wasn't waiting for my phone to ring." She tapped the smallest pile. "These 2 are actually overdue. This one you're fine on for another month." "How do you know that?" "Just by looking. I've been doing my father's real book since I was 22, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Not the version the board sees, the real ones. Nobody ever gave me a title for it. I just got good at knowing when a number was lying." She set the pen down. "It's the only thing about the last 7 years I'm not sorry I learned." I didn't say anything clever back. I just sat down across from her, and for a while we went through my bills together like it was the most normal thing in the world. And it struck me, somewhere in the middle of that I hadn't thought once about how the apartment usually felt too quiet after 9 at night. I'd lived alone for 4 years and told myself I liked the quiet. I hadn't noticed how loud it actually was until it stopped. 2 days after that, I picked up an extra shift when Ridgeline called in short-staffed, and I came home a little after midnight. Quiet in a way Naomi picked up on before I'd even set my keys down. "Bad night?" she asked from the couch, an old laptop of mine open on her knees. "Long one. Not bad, exactly." I sat down across from her, elbows on my knees. 2-car accident came in tonight. Nobody died. It just reminded me of one that wasn't so lucky. She didn't fill the silence, just waited, and something about the way she waited made it easier to keep going than it usually was. 3 years ago, I was first on scene at a wreck on I-25. 2 people needed help at the same time, on opposite sides of the road, and I had about 10 seconds to decide who got me first. I looked at the floor instead of at her. I made the right call. Every protocol I've ever been trained on says I made the right call. But I've replayed those 10 seconds probably 1,000 times since, wondering if a version of me that hadn't hesitated even that long could have saved them both instead of just one. What happened to the second person? He lived. He's not the same as he was, but he lived. I finally looked up. After that, I made myself a rule. Don't think. Move. It's why I didn't stop to ask you a single question at that gate. Some circuit in me decided a long time ago that hesitating is the most dangerous thing a person can do, and I haven't found a good enough reason to argue with it since. Naomi was quiet a moment, then reached over and set her hand flat against mine on the couch cushion. Not holding it, just resting there. "I don't think that's a flaw," she said. "I think that's the reason I'm sitting in your apartment instead of standing alone at an airport gate." "Maybe." I turned my hand so our fingers laced together, on purpose this time, no gray suit anywhere to explain it away. Or maybe I just got lucky about who grabbed my hand. My friend Owen noticed before I said a word about any of it. We'd worked next to each other in that ER for 6 years, long enough that he could read weather off my face from across a room. And when I came in for my next shift, he took one look at me and said, "Okay, who is she?" "Nobody," I said, which was apparently a popular lie that month. "You've got a nobody living on your couch who reorganized your Tupperware, according to a text your sister sent me by accident." He crossed his arms. "Simon, you met this woman in an airport under a week ago. That's not the part I'd worry about, if I were you." His voice dropped, actual concern under the teasing now. "I've known you a long time. I've watched you run into burning buildings, metaphorically, more times than I can count, and I've never once seen you let anybody stay after." I didn't have a clean answer, so I didn't try to give him one. "She's not staying because I decided it," I said. "She's staying because she doesn't have anywhere else yet. That's different." Owen looked at me the way you look at someone who isn't telling the whole truth, including to himself. "Sure," he said, "different." He caught my arm before I could walk off, though, and for a second the teasing dropped away completely. "For what it's worth, you look better than you have in years. Just be careful. Whatever she's running from, make sure it isn't running toward you too." I told him I would. I wasn't sure yet if that was true. Then he grabbed a chart and went back to work, and I stood there a second longer than I needed to, because he wasn't wrong, and we both knew it. That night, after Owen's voice had rattled around in my head through an entire shift, I came home to find Naomi asleep on the couch, the laptop still open on her chest, a half-filled-out job listing for financial analysts glowing on the screen, like she'd started building a life in Denver without letting herself admit that's what she was doing. I glanced at it before I closed the lid, at the cursor blinking in a field she hadn't decided how to fill in yet, some question about long-term goals she'd left blank 3 times over. I didn't wake her to ask about it. Some plans need to stay unspoken a while longer before anyone's allowed to call them real. I turned off the lamp instead of waking her. She stirred anyway, blinking up at me in the dark. "You're staring," she said, voice thick with sleep. "I'm thinking about how the first time I kissed you, I didn't have a single second to think about it. And I've spent days now wondering what it would be like to have all the time in the world instead." She sat up slowly, the laptop sliding onto the cushion beside her, and in the low light from the street outside, she looked at me the way she hadn't let herself look at me yet. Not scared, not grateful, just looking. "Only one way to find out," she said. And this time, when I leaned in, there was no gray suit anywhere in the terminal of my mind, no danger to hide from, nothing but her hand coming up slow to rest against my jaw like she had all the time in the world and meant to use every second of it. Neither of us said anything else that night that needed saying. 6 days folded into each other like that, ordinary in a way that felt almost dangerous after how the week had started. Naomi called her sister Claire twice a day, quiet, careful calls from my bedroom with the door shut. I only caught pieces through the wall. "Is he eating?" "Don't tell him where." "I know, Claire, I know. Just watch him for me." She never once called her father directly. I didn't ask why. Some silences explain themselves. On the 5th night, I came out of the shower to find her out on the fire escape past my kitchen window, phone pressed to her ear, jacket pulled tight against the cold. I only caught the tail end of it. "I don't care what he told the caterer, Claire. Tell him to hold everything." A pause. "Because I'm not there to say it myself, that's why. Just hold everything." I'll explain when I can." When she climbed back inside, her face had gone the particular pale of somebody who'd just realized a clock was running faster than she'd thought. Once, on the fourth day, a car idled too long outside my building, and Naomi went still at the window for almost a full minute before it finally pulled away. Just somebody waiting on a rideshare that hadn't shown up yet. Neither of us said out loud how much that had scared us. We didn't have to. On the sixth morning, I was making coffee when someone knocked on my apartment door. 3 even knocks, unhurried, the kind of knock that already knows you're home. Naomi went pale before I'd even reached it. "Don't," she said, too quiet, already backing toward the hallway. "Simon, don't open that." I opened it anyway. Standing on the other side was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, gray suit, gray at the temples too, and something about him snagged on a memory I hadn't let myself examine until right now. The same gray suit, a terminal in Cleveland, 6 days earlier, a man who'd walked past us without stopping. He looked past me, straight at Naomi frozen in the hallway, and something in his face wasn't the hard professional blankness I'd braced for. It looked almost like relief. "Hello, Naomi," he said. "You had me worried half to death." "Victor." Her voice cracked around his name. "How did you? Your father knew you'd gone to the airport. Your car was still sitting in the Hopkins garage when he sent me after you that same morning." Victor said it plainly, like a man reciting a report he'd already given once that week. "I bought a ticket of my own just to get past security. But by the time I made it through, I couldn't find you anywhere. I searched that whole terminal and somehow walked right past you." He shook his head, still visibly annoyed with himself. "Yesterday, I finally remembered the location sharing your father put on your phone when you were 16, after you snuck out to a concert in Columbus. Nobody had turned it off in 13 years. That's how I found this door." I didn't say anything about the 6 feet, about exactly how he'd walked right past her. Some things a man keeps to himself, and Naomi's face told me she was thinking the same thing and had no intention of explaining it either. I stood in my own doorway feeling distinctly like a man who'd wandered into the wrong scene of somebody else's movie. "You want to come in?" I said. "Or is this a hallway conversation?" Victor's eyes moved to me for the first time, taking a slow, unhurried inventory. Whatever he found there seemed to satisfy something. "Simon, is it? Naomi's told her sister about you. Sounds like you've been decent to her." "I've tried." "Good." He looked back at Naomi. "I'm not here to drag you home with the windows up, if that's what you're bracing for. I need 15 minutes. And then whatever you decide to do next is still your decision." "It was always going to be your decision. I told your father that a week ago, and he didn't want to hear it." Naomi's shoulders came down half an inch, not all the way, enough that I noticed. 15 minutes, she said. We sat around my kitchen table, the same table where she'd once sorted my overdue bills into neat piles, and Victor set a folder down in the middle of it like a man laying down something heavy he'd carried too long. "I've worked for your father 18 years, he said. "I was there when your grandfather still walked the floor himself. So believe me, I did not want to be the one bringing you this." He tapped the folder. 3 weeks ago, I started pulling records, routine due diligence ahead of the merger, the kind of thing nobody reads twice. I found 2 shell LLCs, registered 8 months ago through a holding company that traces straight back to Julian, not to Voss Industrial, to him, personally. No employees, no operating history, nothing but paperwork positioning them to buy and resell industrial equipment fast. Naomi went very still. "Say that in a way that means something to me." "It means somebody's already planning where your grandfather's machines are going to end up after the wedding," Victor said. "And it isn't staying on the factory floor." I watched her hands curl into fists on the table, watched something in her face go from frightened to furious in about 2 seconds flat, and she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, opened a voice memo, and set it down between us like it was a live grenade. "I have something too," she said. The audio was short, maybe 30 seconds, tinny with wind noise, clearly caught by accident. A man's voice, easy and pleased with himself, talking to someone she didn't name. Bored seats, not needing to keep pretending after the ceremony. A laugh, and then, clear as anything, "She's good for the photos and the deal. That's it. You're the one I'm actually keeping around, so relax." Nobody said anything for a moment after it ended. "That's Julian," Naomi said finally, her voice flat in the specific way voices go flat when they've already cried everything they had to cry about a thing. "I was sending Claire a voice memo the night before I left, and my phone was already recording when he stepped out onto the terrace to take a call he thought no one could hear." She looked at Victor. "I heard it, and 4 hours later I was standing at Hopkins with no plan except to get out." Victor closed the folder slowly. "Your father needs to hear both of these tonight, if we can manage it. The wedding's in 2 days, and the merger is scheduled to close that same morning. Once the transaction documents are signed and the equipment sales start moving, a recording and a shipping manifest won't be enough to stop it." I watched Naomi look at the folder, then at her phone, then, finally, at me. And I understood before she said it that whatever came next, she wasn't planning to do it alone. But she also wasn't sure yet if she had the right to ask me to come with her. "I'm not putting you on a plane back into that," she said. "You've already done enough, more than enough." I stood up, went to the hall closet, and pulled out the bag I hadn't fully unpacked from the conference 6 days earlier, because some part of me had apparently known this was coming before she did. "You didn't ask," I said. "I'm telling you, I'm coming." Victor booked the earliest flight out of Denver, and somewhere over Iowa again, in nearly the same seats we'd had 6 days before. Naomi reached over without a word and laced her fingers through mine. It wasn't a request this time, it was just a fact she needed to hold on to for the next 2 hours. By the time we landed back in Cleveland, the sky had gone that particular gray that comes right before evening. Low clouds pressing down over a city she hadn't planned on seeing again this soon, if ever. She didn't say much in the car. Neither did I. Some silences don't need filling. They just need somebody sitting next to you inside them. The house Naomi grew up in sat behind a low stone wall on a street lined with maples just starting to bud. And through the tall dining room windows I could see shapes moving. A small gathering already underway. Victor had called ahead. Edmund Voss was there for what was supposed to be a final toast before the wedding, one last handshake between two families about to become one. Julian was there too, dressed like a man already halfway through congratulating himself. Naomi didn't knock. She walked through her own front door like she still had every right to it, which she did, and the room went quiet in stages. The way rooms do when the wrong person walks in at the wrong moment and everyone realizes it at once. Her father shot up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "Naomi." Relief and fury crossed his face in the same half-second. "Where in God's name have you?" "I need everyone to sit back down," she said, and something in her voice made even Edmund Voss, a man who I'd later learn hadn't taken an order from anybody in 30 years, lower himself back into his chair. Julian was the only one still smiling. "Naomi, sweetheart, whatever this is, we can talk about it after. Don't." She set her phone on the white tablecloth between the wine glasses, like she was placing a card in a game only she knew the rules to. "Don't call me sweetheart, not after what I heard you say on that terrace." His smile didn't move. Something behind his eyes did. She pressed play. The room heard it exactly the way I had. The wind noise, the easy laugh, the words that turned 400 jobs and one family's whole future into something he'd bragged about like a punchline. I watched Edmund Voss's face change while it played. Watched 30 years of careful business posture crack straight down the middle. When it ended, nobody spoke for what felt like a very long time. "Julian," Edmund said finally, quiet in a way that was somehow worse than shouting, "tell me that isn't your voice. It's out of context. Whatever she recorded, it's 30 seconds of you laughing about which one of us you were actually planning on keeping." Naomi's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Tell me what context fixes that. I'll wait." He didn't have one. "It's 30 seconds of you explaining exactly how you were going to gut a company my name was about to be attached to," Edmund said, standing now, his voice climbing. "Do you understand what that does to us if it reaches a single reporter? Do you understand what you almost cost me?" Victor stepped forward and set his own folder down beside the phone. "There's more. 2 Shell LLCs, registered 8 months ago through a holding company that traces back to Julian personally, already positioned to receive equipment sales the moment the merger closes." He looked at Richard. "I should have brought this to you the day I found it. I'm sorry it took your daughter running halfway across the country to make me say so out loud." Richard Prescott stood very still at the head of his own table, looking between the folder, the phone, his daughter, and the man he'd spent a year deciding could be trusted with everything he'd built. Something in his face, some last piece of certainty, finally gave way. "Get out of my house," he said to Julian, and his voice didn't shake at all. Julian looked around the room for an ally and didn't find one. Even his own father wouldn't meet his eyes. He left without another word, and the front door closing behind him was the loudest sound in the house. Edmund stayed. He poured himself a drink he didn't ask permission for, and stood by the window a long moment before turning back to Richard. "The investment doesn't have to die with the wedding," he said. "I built half my career on knowing when to cut a loss fast, and my son just became the biggest one I've ever had to cut. I'll have my lawyers draft new terms this week. No marriage clause, just numbers, the way it should have been from the start." He looked at Naomi, something almost like shame crossing his face. "I'm sorry you had to find out what he was like the hard way. You deserved better than my son a long time before tonight." When he'd gone, the room emptied out slow. Claire got to her sister first, hugging her hard enough that I heard Naomi's breath catch. "I told you not to marry him," Claire said into her shoulder, half laughing, half something else. "You get to say that exactly once," Naomi told her. "Use it wisely." Victor quietly stepped out to make calls that needed making. Richard stayed where he was at the head of the table, looking older than he had when we walked in. "I almost sold you," he said finally, not looking directly at either of us. "I told myself I was saving 400 families, and maybe I was, but I was also willing to spend my own daughter to do it. And I don't know how I live with having gotten that close." Naomi crossed the room and put her hand on his shoulder, the way you'd steady someone standing too near an edge. "You didn't do it," she said. "That has to count for something." "It counts," he said, "for exactly as much as you decide it does." He finally looked up, past her, to me. "You're the one who flew back with her. I didn't think she should do this alone." Richard studied me a long moment, the kind of look I imagined he'd given a lot of contracts in his life, weighing what was underneath the words. "Thank you for that," he said, and stood and shook my hand like he meant it. And that was as close to a blessing as either of us needed. The wedding that had been 8 days away when I first felt Naomi's hand close around mine never happened at all. The invitations that had already gone out became the kind of story people in Cleveland's business circles would talk about for years, quietly, at other people's weddings. Prescott Steelworks signed new terms with Voss Industrial 6 weeks later. Plain and fair, no ceremony required, and 400 people whose jobs had been hanging on a marriage kept showing up to work the next Monday without ever knowing how close it had come to going the other way. 10 months later, Naomi and I got married in my sister's backyard in Denver. Under string lights Owen swore he'd hung completely straight, and absolutely had not, with about 30 people who actually knew us, instead of 200 who'd come for the seating chart and the open bar. Naomi runs her own small accounting practice now, 3 clients in and already turning people away. The first thing in 7 years with her name on it, instead of her father's. Victor still calls twice a year, mostly to report that Richard has finally learned to use the family group chat Claire set up for the 3 of them. Badly, 1 thumb at a time. I still work nights at Ridgeline. I still don't hesitate, not because whatever broke in me 3 years ago ever got fixed, but because for the first time in a long while, moving fast toward something instead of away from it doesn't feel like running at all. 3 weeks ago, we stood at that same gate in Cleveland, on our way home from Claire's college graduation, waiting to board a flight that was, for once, boring in exactly the way flights are supposed to be. Naomi went quiet for a second, looking around like she was checking the room against a memory. "This is the gate," she said. "I know." She turned to face me fully, the boarding line starting to move behind her. Nobody in a gray suit anywhere in sight. No reason at all for either of us to be afraid of anything in that terminal. Then she reached up, slow, unhurried, and rested her hand against my jaw the way she had that first quiet night in my apartment. "Kiss me like you mean it," she whispered. This time, there was no one to hide from. I did it anyway,